Hello everyone, I am Dr. Prajakta from Rajkot Institute of Management Research and Development, Pune. In last session, we learned about descriptive statistics wherein we learned how to calculate mean, median, mode, quartile deviation, standard deviation and variance using R programming. Now going a step further, we are going to learn about hypothesis testing. Hypothesis testing video is actually divided into two parts. In first part, we are going to revise basic concepts of hypothesis testing, and in next video, we will learn how to use various statistical methods for hypothesis testing. So in this video, we are going to learn hypothesis and hypothesis testing, types of hypothesis, types of errors, p-value and normal curve. So what is hypothesis? A hypothesis is precise assumption, a testable statement of what the researcher predict will be the outcome of the study. Hypothesis is proposed for the sake of argument so that it can be tested to see if it might be true. A hypothesis is nothing but an assumption which is tested to determine the relationship between two variables. So two variables are dependent and independent variables. A hypothesis testing is nothing but a statistical test used to determine whether the hypothesis assumed for the sample of data stands true for the entire population or not. Now, what are the types of hypothesis? So there are two types of hypothesis, null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis is a statement which asserts that there is no difference between the sample statistic and population parameter. It is denoted by H0 and which is given by mu1 is equal to mu2. In short, the null hypothesis states that there is no relationship between two variables being studied, and it also states the result are due to the chance and are not significant in terms of supporting the idea being investigated. The null hypothesis assumes that whatever you are trying to prove did not happen. On the other hand, alternative hypothesis is the statement which stands true if the null hypothesis is rejected. The alternative hypothesis states that the independent variable did not affect the dependent variable and the results are significant in terms of supporting the theory being investigated. It is denoted by H1 and which is given by mu1 is not equal to mu2. So these are the main two types of hypothesis. Now let us see the example of hypothesis. Suppose we want to test if the college students take less than 5 years to graduate from the college on the average. So the null and the alternative hypothesis are. Now the alternative hypothesis is the one which we actually try to prove. So in this case, alternative hypothesis is mu less than 5 years and null hypothesis is mu greater than equal to 5 years. In the next example, we want to test whether the mean height of 8th standard students is 66 inches. So in this case, we have to use the correct symbol for null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So in this case, the alternative hypothesis is mu not equal to 66, whereas the null hypothesis is mu is equal to 66 inches. Let us look at the third example. A car dealership announces that mean time for an oil change is less than 15 minutes. So the alternative hypothesis is mu less than 15 minutes, whereas the null hypothesis is mu is greater than equal to 15. So this is how we define the null and alternative hypothesis. Now let us revise some key terms and concepts included in hypothesis testing. The first is level of significance. The level of significance refers to the degree of significance in which we accept or reject the null hypothesis. Actual 100% accuracy is not at all possible for accepting or rejecting a hypothesis. So we therefore select a level of significance that is usually 5%. So significance level of 0.05 indicates a 5% risk of concluding that the difference exists when there is no actually difference. The next is type 1 error. When we reject the null hypothesis, although that hypothesis was true, then type 1 error occurs. The probability of committing the type 1 error is denoted by letter alpha. In hypothesis testing, the normal curve that shows the critical region is called as alpha region. The next is type 2 error. When we accept the null hypothesis when it is actually false, then type 2 error occurs. The probability of committing the type 2 error is denoted by beta. In hypothesis testing, the normal curve that shows the acceptance region is called as beta region. Now let us revise. The null hypothesis can either be true or either be false. Now, type 1 error occurs when we actually reject the null hypothesis when it is actually true. So, type 1 error occurs in this case and it is denoted by letter alpha. And when we reject the null hypothesis when it is actually false, then no error occurs. The next is we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it is actually false. So, in this case, type 2 error occurs and it is beta. And when we fail to reject the null hypothesis when it is actually true, then no error occurs. So, this is the concept of type 1 and type 2 error. Now, let us look into what is the concept of p-value. Now, p-value, when you perform a statistical test, a p-value helps you to determine the significance of your results in relation to the null hypothesis. The level of statistical significance is often expressed as p-value and it usually lies between 0 and 1. The smaller the p-value, the stronger is the evidence that you should reject the null hypothesis. So, in short, when p-value is less than 0.05, it is statistically significant. Then reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Whereas when p-value is more than 0.05, it is not significant and it indicates the strong evidence for the null hypothesis. This means we retain the null hypothesis and reject the alternative hypothesis. So this is the normal curve. We generally use one-tail or two-tail test for hypothesis testing. A test of hypothesis where the region of rejection is on both sides of the sampling distribution is called as two-tail test. And when the region of rejection falls on either of the side of sampling distribution, it is called as one-tail test. So you can see here the critical region is red color. This is called as critical region. So when your level of significance is 5%, so 5% is actually divided into two equal parts and it is shown by alpha by 2 on both the sides. And we know that alpha plus beta is equal to 1, that is the probability. So alpha shows rejection region and beta shows acceptance region. So how to denote the acceptance region? Beta is equal to 1 minus alpha. So you can see here 1 minus alpha, this whole region is called as acceptance region. Okay, so when p-value is less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis. And when p-value is greater than 0.05, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Okay. So I hope this video is useful for you. In next video, we will learn about how to perform hypothesis testing using regression analysis and correlation analysis. Thank you.